Are you looking to get faster for the half marathon or the marathon distance? Have you tried to hit a PR, but you keep coming up empty? Are you feeling stuck with your running and you're not sure what you're doing wrong? Do you want to learn more about what most coaches would argue is the most important type of run to master in your training to get better at the marathon or the half marathon distance? Saddle up as we cover everything you need to know in mastering the tempo run. I have Kat from our Healthy Runner coaching team with me here today to talk about one of the main four types of runs you should be implementing as a runner, following along in our 6 steps to growing as a runner. This will be the official How to Do a Tempo Run episode so you can get stronger, run faster, and enjoy lifelong injury-free running for decades to come. Coach Kat, you know how we do this. Give all the new listeners in our audience a little bit about yourself and who you are, and let us know why you love running.
Okay. I am Coach Kat. I am a fitness instructor at our local YMCA as well as the Group X coordinator. So I get to deal with all of the group classes that you could think of in a gym. I'm a run coach. I work with everybody from very beginners at our Y from couch to 5K for that charity, but I also obviously am a healthy runner coach, which is a much more in-depth program. And I work with people all the way up to ultra marathons, which brings me to I have done every race distance almost. I haven't tackled the 100K yet, or a 50 miler, but I have done 50K. I've done relays. I just finished a 10-hour endurance trail race. So I do trail and road, which is a little bit of a hybrid and a little bit different, but it makes it more interesting, I think, for me. And it gives me a really broad range to draw from. And I use a lot of my own experiences when I'm coaching as well as the science. And I can tell you generally if something's going to work or if something you read on Google I'm like, no, that's not going to work. It may be never. So that's just a little bit about myself. I was going to say, I like cat. I like so many things I can't even list them. Let's not even get into that.
Well, you are a scientist by trade and you're an engineer.
Yes.
You love tractors. You love Marvel movies.
Avengers. Die-hard Avenger fan. I'm not going to get into the different Avengers because that is very polarizing. So Scarlet Witch all the way. Team Cap. Those are, if you're Marvel fans, you will know what I mean when I say those two things. I do like, cats. I love animals. I love cars. You name it. I love being outside. I love animals. I used to volunteer and work at the Bronx Zoo. So I have a lot of different skill sets.
You definitely do. I would agree with that wholeheartedly. You are probably one, most people are like, if they're into a lot of different things, they're like a master of nothing. For some reason, you're like a master of many things because your level of knowledge in particular areas are very, very impressive. And that's why I love the work you do with the clients in our program because you can cover such a diverse, running population, whether it is someone who's struggled with chronic injuries, whether they worked with me first on getting over an injury, and now you're kind of, working on their mindset and really getting the confidence to get back to running a half marathon, or if they're a trail runner, or if they've kind of, quote unquote, failed a couple times at the marathon distance. And, like you've had all of these broad experiences yourself, which I love. And you can really help guide someone in those particular areas. Not to even mention that you're a treadmill expert as well. And
I forgot that. How the heck could I have forgotten I'm a treadmill person? I'm a treadmill instructor, and treadmills are my babies. How on earth could I have forgotten about the treadmill situation?
So
Like I
those of you who call it the treadmill, Coach
it,
Cat will
no
help you learn how.
misconception.
Yes, it can be actually fun and stimulating. For
Yes.
myself personally, I experienced that firsthand because I never run on the treadmill, and I did Coach Kat's workout that she put in our program for our clients for when it's too hot outside or too cold outside and they need to get a run in and they want to get a
Thunder.
run in. They can get it in on the treadmill and it doesn't have to feel torturous because I actually loved the run. It was very stimulating. It gave a lot of variety. It was fantastic. So yes, you have multiple skill sets, but today's skill set
Yes.
is we're going to kind of dive into this tempo run. And, Coach Cat's going to really educate us on like, why do we do tempo runs and who should do tempo runs, who shouldn't do tempo runs. And then we'll get into like tempo pace calculators and ways that we can think of perhaps some easier methods to think about how we tackle the tempo run and really more importantly get the benefits
Yes.
of integrating this type of run into our training. And as you guys probably are aware of at this point, but Spark Healthy Runner has given like hundreds and hundreds of runners a plan for getting stronger and faster without getting injured. And our plan will work for you too in terms of looking at this tempo run and integrating it into your training. So all you need to do is like, stay tuned, listen in, but then that's not it, right? You can't just learn about something. You have to actually implement it and take action. So kind of implement all of the tips we're going to share with you. And then also, if you learned something and you implemented it, it helped you, you have to share that, right, with a running friend of yours who is struggling at getting faster and staying healthy as a runner. So we appreciate that. And if you do this, really, you're going to be taking one of the foundational types of runs. And when we look at our 6 steps to growing as a runner, that mindset is super important. You have to master that. You have to integrate strength training into your running. You have to actually have a well designed run plan. And that's really what we're going to be focusing on today. We talk about really designing your run plan initially around 4 types of runs, with the easy run being integral, the long run being a staple each week, and then the tempo run, which is what we're going to do the deep dive on today, and then the interval run when that comes into play. And then besides the run plan, we also need to take into account our recovery, which is super important and often forgotten about when we're looking at our running. And then also just thinking about like, what is our race day plan, right? And like, how are we executing kind of that perfect race day strategy? So, as I kind of mentioned earlier, if you've been struggling at like, hey, I'm not getting any faster for my marathon, I'm not getting any faster for my half marathon, what we're going to talk about today is going to be super helpful, but keep it in the context of thinking about all of our steps and how we grow as a runner. And I didn't even mention, Brooke is going to kill me that I forgot to mention nutrition and fueling for our runs. I was like, wait,
No.
how many steps did I say? So, yes, nutrition and fueling for the run is also one of those steps in kind of improving as a runner. So, yeah, Coach Cat, let's get into, I guess the basic question here is, what is a tempo run?
All right. Such a seemingly simple question that isn't as simple as it sounds. There's a lot of misconception, or a lot of people, when I tell them about tempo runs, they kind of know what it is, but they don't know what it is. So, the scientific version, simplified, is it is the hardest effort your body can handle, that it's able to clear the lactate equally as it's being produced. So that's a really scientific description of it. So it's at what pace your body is clearing the lactate as it's being produced, so that you don't feel that achy feeling you get. You always say you have lactate built up or lactic acid build up. So you don't hit that feeling. So it's how fast can your body get rid of it and process it in relation to how fast you produce it. Generally speaking, that's the scientific term. And at any point, if anybody wants the really nitty gritty science part, email me. I have a master's degree in molecular and cellular bio, and I love the science nitty gritty. But if you aren't a science person and you just want to get faster, you really probably are not going to care about the lactate and how to measure all that scientifically. But if you do, I'm your person. Contact me. I'll be more than happy to share that information with you. So that's the technical term. The I'm going to say the more general term is a pace you can hold for a certain time that's classified as comfortably hard. And again, I get, well, what is comfortably hard? Well, then I would say it's an RPE of 878. Well, what's an RPE of 7.8? So you go down this like rabbit hole of trying to explain. So what I tell people is, and I'll get into the details of how long, but for however long your tempo run is supposed to be, whether it's a time based or distance based, because you could have both, how hard can you, what pace can you sustain for that duration without feeling completely out of breath, without feeling like you're going to collapse, but at the same time, not feeling like, oh, I could do this forever. So it's that it, they say race pace a little below your race pace, but if you've never run a race, you're not going to know what that is. A lot of times, a lot of these terms, people are assuming you already have a base and you know, but a lot of times you don't. So it's what the pace is that you can handle for however long your tempo run is, where you're not at the end, you need a break, but you're not like, it's not an interval, it's not a sprint, it's not I can't breathe, I'm about to collapse on the ground. But it's also not a jog in the park, I can talk to my friends. So, you know, and I will get more into details about, we'll go into the specifics of that in a bit.
Yeah, no, I think that's super helpful, and thank you for kind of simplifying what can be a very complex topic. And how I like to think about this is, and you're right, there are different terms and that we can call like aerobic threshold versus lactic threshold, and all of those types of terms. I like to think of it as it's the hardest type of run that we can do that we're still efficiently like exchanging oxygen. And like I just envision in my mind, I'm still utilizing oxygen, I'm breathing heavier, but I have not crossed over that line where, if anyone's ever done a race before, right, where you get to that point in the race and you're like totally gassed and
Yeah.
you're like, all right, my mind is going to take me the rest of the way. You're in the pain cave. Or if you've ever done, sprint training or interval training or track based work where you're running so fast, by the end of it, you're huffing and puffing. Like you're not going there because the reason you're huffing and puffing is because you can't breathe because you don't have oxygen anymore. And we call that anaerobic, right? We're
Uh-huh.
not utilizing oxygen while we're running, or we're starting not to, right? So it's really that fastest pace that we're still using oxygen and we can actually sustain it for a length of time. And I think this is the integral part for especially marathoners and half marathoners, is this is where we get that benefit of being able to run faster during a race, because now we've trained our bodies to tolerate running at a faster pace, not for a short period of time, but for like an extended period of time. Would you kind of agree with that description there?
Yes. That's why this is a very sometimes confusing topic for people. And, you know, I also like to say it is a faster run in between a warm up and a cool down at its simplest, you
Mhm.
know. So a lot of times, and I will get into more of that, but if you're a very beginner tempo run person, then maybe do your warm up at a comfortable pace, push that second or that tempo run a little harder, and then go down to an easy run for cool down. Sometimes that's as simple as complicated as it needs to be for beginners, like who have never really done tempo runs.
Okay, so that's definitely helpful. So I guess maybe before we kind of get into like how we do these, maybe let's get into like why we would do these. What are like the benefits of a tempo run?
Okay. Well, the longer you do tempo runs, the more your lactate threshold is going to increase. And what that means, the ratio, and what that means is you're going to be able to run faster for a longer period of time while you start training. It also gets you prepared for feeling uncomfortable during a race. You start to feel like, okay, I can push through this. I'm not going crazy, but I'm still, this isn't exactly what I can't just sit on the couch. I can't just eat. I can't drink. It prepares you for the race. Your body, it gets your body used to, okay, I know what this is. And it also mentally prepares you for times in your race where you may need to push that pace, and your body will know, okay, I know how this feels. I know what I'm doing. And I give the example, and I give this example because I love my examples. Last year's Remicon, which for anybody who's not familiar, I did a 3-person relay, 95 miles. We had a very tight pace we had to keep. You had to maintain a pace, otherwise you're going to be swept. My third leg, I had already run 20 some odd miles. I don't even know. I had severe cramps before on my second leg. And that third mile, I had to do a pace that for me was aggressive, very aggressive to maintain this for our team. And I did it because what happened is I had practiced all of the elements that we do, easy runs, but the intervals and the tempo run, I knew what to expect. I knew, okay, I'm going to go into a tempo run. This is, I hate to say it, this is going to suck, but I know my body can do it. And mentally, I was prepared because I had done this in training so many times that it, like, when I realized, okay, this is just a tempo pace, don't freak out. It's just a tempo pace. You could do this. And I was able to do it. So the tempo run is great if you want to increase your speed, but also don't underestimate the mental aspect of it. And a lot of times it's good for half marathoners and above. We could go into who probably wouldn't necessarily benefit as much from this type of run, but usually half marathons and above are why you would do this. For that whole, you get faster, you really do, but your body knows what to expect. Physically and mentally, you're like, okay, this is going to not be pleasant, but it'll work. And it wasn't pleasant. I'll be honest with that. Oh, it was not pleasant, but I got it done. I did the pace, which for me, like I said, you couldn't even ask Coach Lou, who I ran it with. It was an aggressive pace.
Right. Yeah. And I love that you brought up the mental aspect because I think that is huge for this type of run. Not only physically are we like making our bodies more efficient at essentially running at this faster pace for a longer period of time and being able to still remove waste so that like lactic acid doesn't build up. And we should probably mention that, you will hear some, and even myself, I'll commonly refer to this as like threshold pace as
Yes.
well. Because again, the sciencey part kind of says this is your threshold pace. So those terms are used interchangeably by most people when you hear about it. So you'll even hear me kind of say tempo threshold. I think the public kind of thinks of it as a pace, but we'll talk about how it's technically not a pace. But
Yeah.
I will still use those terms interchangeably just so someone doesn't get confused. But it is a tempo run. So physically, it kind of allows our body to increase our stamina, if you will, like
Mhm.
for that extended period of time, which definitely helps out in races because you're never, ever going at your race pace really in training for the distance that you're doing for the race. I need to clarify that for the distance that you're
Good
doing for
point.
the
Yeah,
race,
that,
because that
good
would be racing.
clarification.
That would not be training. And we don't race in training, right? But the mental side, I think, is huge. Like you nailed it. I feel like myself personally, as I've, extended these out from doing way back in the beginning, a 2 mile tempo run, 2 miles at that tempo pace to a 3 mile to even doing 4 miles. Like that was a huge jump, even just
Mhm.
mentally,
Yes.
and knowing how it feels, like that uncomfortable feeling that I had during that run, like you said, mentally helps prepare you for your race. If
Mhm.
your goal is to get faster and you want to get that PR, because it's going to be uncomfortable, right? And you need to utilize some of your mental strategies during those hard training runs, such as the tempo run. So it's like not as fast as your interval or your speed work, sprint work, if you think about, but it's uncomfortable because you're holding it for this extended period of time, and it kind
Mhm.
of builds up. And for those of you who are experienced half marathoners or marathoners, when that uncomfortable feeling occurs during the race, whether it is at a half at around 10 or 11 miles, or at the full, at the 20-mile mark, right? And thereafter, you're going to have that overwhelming feeling, and you might not even have increased your pace at all, but
Yeah.
it's just the accumulation over time. Like, hey, we've been doing this for a while. Like, this feels really uncomfortable. And so I love the fact that you brought up the mental side, because I find that that is a huge benefit. Is it gives you that opportunity to practice your mental game and your mental strategies and training that you're going to utilize for your race. And then it also gives you that boost of confidence
Mhm.
that you did this harder run, you got into this uncomfortable feeling, and you were able to kind of conquer it. So yeah, those are some great benefits. So I guess who would benefit from doing a tempo run?
Mm, Anybody who, now I have to clarify this, and this comes to, experience. If you are a beginner with limited experience in training plans, I would say you don't want to listen to this exact part. But who benefits from a tempo run is basically anybody who is running a half marathon or above. With the lower distances, you can always benefit from a tempo run. Always. Whether you're doing a 5K or you're doing a 10K, you can benefit from tempo runs. And I will give 5K people or 10K people, I will give them tempo runs. But those are a little shorter. And that I'll go into the technicality of how long a tempo run should be. But I see usually a 5K can be over, and this is not, I'm just saying in about half hour to 45 minutes, your 5K is over. A tempo run usually is between 20 minutes on. So 5Ks can benefit from tempo runs, but the bigger benefit will be for, in my opinion, half marathoners and above. And
Yep.
just because of the nature of it. Whereas uh, it's all relative, but doing 400-meter repeats may not, or one time around a track as fast as you can, may not benefit and will not benefit, chances are, a marathoner, but it would do excellent benefit for a 5K person to increase speed. So there are very different plans, but in my opinion, most everybody, unless you are a true beginner, can benefit from a tempo run. And even a beginner can benefit from a tempo run as long as we talk about, and we're going to talk about the pace and how fast you should be running through a tempo. And you will see that why you can do a tempo run pretty much.
Yeah, and I love that you brought up the duration and the length of time that we're holding this tempo pace,
Mm-hmm.
because we can change that variable as
Yes.
well. And for a beginner runner or someone who is training for a 5K or a 10K, you could utilize this more in their base training phase,
Yes.
right, as opposed to
I
their
do.
race specific
I do.
training. But like, yeah, you said that programming wise, that'd be great to like add in base. Whereas usually for like the marathon distance, for example, we almost do the opposite. In their base training phase, we really focus on maybe some more strength building, some faster work to get the legs turning over. And then as we get closer to the race, we actually transition more to extending out this faster running and running more at the tempo pace and adding marathon paced miles into specific runs.
Yes.
So I kind of think of those as like when in the training cycle we add them in. So that will vary. So who really wouldn't a tempo run be that beneficial for?
Somebody who's doing probably their first experience as a runner, whether it is a 5K, a 10K, chances are, if you've never run before, you're not going to attempt a half marathon. But I've seen stranger things. So you don't want to do a tempo run if you don't have a good base. It's always down to your, your base. Or if you hear a tempo run of my friend did a tempo run, so I'm going to do a tempo run. No, no, put the brakes on. Think about it logically. Consult with, if you have a coach, I highly recommend it. But if you don't, consult with like the Healthy Runner people or the website. I mean, people have asked questions on our Facebook. We have a great Facebook community, and people have asked questions, and I have direct messages them with answers. So if you do have a question very specific like that, we can help you. It's not a personalized coaching plan unless you sign up, but we do have resources to help you. And if you are wondering whether you can benefit from a tempo run, direct message myself. I answer messages all day long from people. So basically, who shouldn't are, in my opinion, true beginners who are not experienced with the different type of runs and are just trying to get a base down. You may not want to do a tempo run.
And I would even extrapolate on what you said there with beginners of covering the distance. So, like
Yes.
you had mentioned, you wouldn't be a beginner runner and try a half marathon. There are many people, like you said, who do. Or if it's your first half marathon, and maybe you've been running for a while, it's still your first time running and doing a long run of double digits of 10 mile,
Yes.
11 mile. Maybe you do a 12, maybe you just stick with 11 as a beginner for your first half marathon. But you don't want to add those variables and increasing your overall weekly mileage at the same time that you're starting to add in this speed work. And I think this is something that I would say our kind of coaching philosophy at Healthy Runner is pretty consistent between all of us. And it's tough because a lot of runners, as you said, maybe, look across at what their neighbor's doing or their friend, and they're like, well, they're doing this plan and it calls for a tempo run. And I've seen some plans that are beginner based, but still add in this variety of runs. And as I mentioned earlier, yes, we do have four types of runs. However, the tempo and the interval run, we really do not recommend for someone's first half marathon or someone's first marathon unless you've done multiple half marathons with speed work in it, right? And tempo runs in it.
And this is where the run coaching, as a coach, we assess our runners. We see what their background is. We see what they need to work on. So it is very variable with all individuals. I always like to tell people that.
Right. And just generally speaking, though, what we do find is many people either getting injured or, quite frankly, burnt out from the training.
That's
And
the
they don't
bigger,
enjoy it. They don't
that,
enjoy it. They're like, this sucks. Yeah, I'm training for this half marathon. I set this goal. I set this challenge for myself because I'm turning 40 or I'm turning 50, right? And they want to cover this marathon or this half marathon. And they just hate it.
I,
And obviously, we believe in lifelong injury free running. So I would rather have someone like enjoy the training
yeah.
process, celebrate the win, and actually embrace all the benefits that running has to offer us,
Mhm.
right, for our lives versus getting burnt out because you added in way too much and everything felt terrible, hard, right? So that's kind of where we're coming from. And again, like I've seen so many injured runners make some of these training mistakes the first time they go to tackle a certain distance. So I would agree with you that, if it's your first time doing a, marathon, half marathon, then I wouldn't recommend that you start adding in tempo runs unless you are under the guidance of a coach who is going to start with shorter intervals and
Yes.
monitor and see how you respond to the training. But for those of you who aren't working with a coach, then I would highly recommend that you don't tackle those, as well as, I guess, my, you know, running physical therapist brain also needs to state if you're currently still recovering from an injury and are running with some pain. And most injuries, and I've talked about this many times before, you can modify a run plan and still keep someone running without having to stop running if you had some plantar fasciitis, some IT band syndrome, right? Some proximal hamstring tendinopathy or runner's knee. However, if you are still having pain with running, tempo run is not going to certainly help you, right? It's if anything is going to slow down that process of you continuing to get better. So I would also add that in if someone is actively still having symptoms with running, it's been getting better, their symptoms are going down, you're recovering from your injury. Now is not the time to add in the tempo runs yet. So, that will come in the future. So I'll also add that in there. So I guess, if someone's like, okay, I understand the benefits here. And, maybe I've been at this half marathon thing a couple times and I noticed I'm at a kind of a plateau in, I'm not able to break this specific barrier. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. I've never done these tempo runs for the first time. I'm hearing about it. So, Coach Cat, how do I actually do these? Like, what does this actually look like to run at this faster pace that you mentioned?
This is what I do day in and day out. So I'm happy about this. No, I don't do tempo runs day in and day out. I'll be honest. You can either do a time based tempo run or a mileage based tempo run. A lot of times for my beginners who've never done, and when I say beginners, I don't mean new to running. I mean a beginner who is new to a structured plan or new to a specific race distance. It doesn't mean you're a beginner runner. It just means that you're beginning the process of doing a new distance. I usually do it by distance. So I will tell people 1 mile tempo run. So that is where I break it down. Your first mile should be your easy pace that you normally run to get your body used to it. Then your second mile should be your tempo pace. And your third mile should be an easier cool down. You should not use it as a total recovery, that third mile. You should still be moving. So if you find at the end of that third mile, you need to stop, you can't go on, that means your tempo pace was too fast for that specific workout. Usually, in my indication, there's another way to just tell. That's usually an interval or a sprint workout. So that's the first I would do. Then I would start increasing it by a mile. Generally speaking, 2 mile, 3 mile tempo runs. After that, I know you've done some 4 miles for the marathon or even more. I tend to move into a time-based plan. So it can be anywhere from a 20-minute tempo run. It's usually 20 minutes to 60 minutes, believe it or not. 60 minutes is at 60 to is at that extreme, more of an ultra. I've done, you don't generally, because if you're just talking a 10-minute mile, that's 6 miles, you may not, that's a little more extreme. So usually it's between 20 and 40 minutes. And however many miles you can get in the 20 to 40 minutes. So that is the overall how I would structure a tempo run based on where you are in your experience, whether you're very new to tempo runs, or if you're training for an ultra marathon or you're training for a marathon, your tempo runs are definitely going to be longer than if this is your first half marathon tempo run.
Right.
Again, if you see a plan, be very careful if you just get it off the internet when it says a tempo run, because it may have you at a 40-minute or a 2 mile tempo run, but that may be too much for you at that point.
Okay. So just the structure of a tempo run is I like to think of I'm a big turkey sandwich kind of guy, right?
Yeah,
So
okay.
if I think I got my bread, right? So I got my carbs that give me spark. I got my, my top bun, let's say, of my roll. That's going to be like the easy pace mile to start. And then I would also add in there, because I've shared this on the podcast before, that I have been a big fan of actually making the beginning easy part of the run even extend 2 miles, because I feel like that gives
Yep.
me a better warm up, especially for an aging runner like myself. So, you middle aged runners, you might like if you've been doing tempo runs for a while and this is like a refresher for you and you've never tried doing 2 miles as a warm up. Trust me, you'll love a 2 mile warm up before you
Mhm.
actually get into your tempo pace miles. But we have like the bun, your warm up kind of miles at your easy pace, and then the meat in the middle there, your protein, is going to be these tempo miles, the tempo pace. And then we got some carbs on the back end there, and we got the other part of the bun that is going to be easy running after you're done with your tempo miles.
You can even go crazy and like mess up where you're gonna have to put some pickles and lettuce in there
Yes.
and
Let's go
do
there. Let's do
on
it.
a
I
long
know.
run.
I know what you're thinking here.
On a long on your long runs, we always say you should run your long runs easy. But if you're training for a marathon, we will throw tempo runs in there. So you could do, if you have a long run of 20 miles, this is for advanced. I'm not going to give this to my beginner marathoners, but if you have a 20-mile long run, your first 5 miles, go ahead, run it at an easy pace. Then maybe mile 5 through 8 or 9, tempo pace, and then go back to an easy run. So you can incorporate tempo runs not as just their own workout, but within larger workouts as well. A lot of times people don't realize you can put a tempo run inside a bigger workout. You can use them just by themselves, or you could put them into a bigger workout. So you do have that option if you are an experienced run who've done many 20 milers or 18 milers or 15 miles, and you've done that on a regular basis. That's when you might want to incorporate a couple of miles in the middle of that. And you, by the nature, your warm up is going to be easier. You're going to be doing an easy warm up for maybe 5 miles, then go into a tempo pace. So, yes, it can be incorporated into a longer run and not just stand by itself. So again, that's another option, but then that depends on your on how much you've been running as well. You don't want to
Right.
do that. If it's your first 20 miler, we are not adding in tempo runs for your first 20 miler or even your 15 miler. No.
Yeah.
Nope.
And we have a whole training on actually advanced marathon training with Coach Lou on our team, and actually the newest Spark Healthy Runner blueprint PDF kind of guide that was actually just released is our marathon training guide for either beginner or advanced runners, because we have both types of information in there. If you are looking to run a marathon and have longevity in mind, so not only finish the race, but then continue love running after the race and not be injured or not be burnt out, check out the guide. You can just go to learn.sparkhealthyrunner.com /marathon, and you can learn about marathon mindset, which Coach Cat did that training on mindset for the marathon, base building for the marathon, strength training for the marathon, nutrition with Brooke for the marathon, and then also that either beginner training or advanced training for the marathon. So make sure you guys download your copy of that, which has a ton of videos, trainings, like supplemental information that will certainly help you train for your marathon. So thank you for
That's
bringing
right.
that up. That's like kind of the spice. I thought, honestly, you were going with, because I think we can go there now that we kind of mentioned this tempo run has this faster running in the middle. And I think you mentioned it before, is sometimes we can break up. So, as your example, you did 1 mile easy pace, 1 mile at tempo pace, and another mile at easy pace. Once that extends to, let's say, 3 miles at tempo pace, so maybe you do one easy, three in the middle, one at the end. So, in total, you're running 5 miles, but you
Mhm.
have three at tempo pace. a lot of times before we do that, once we start extending out the distance or the time that you talked about, we can add in kind of what we call tempo intervals. So
Yes.
between the turkey, maybe you throw in a pickle, and that's like a 1 minute rest recovery at easy pace just to help bring that
Yes.
heart rate down a little, prevent you from jumping over into not utilizing oxygen, huffing and puffing, as I was mentioning before, and then kind of regroup, think about, oh, I finished the first mile, whew, tackled that. All right, I got another one coming. And then do another mile, and then maybe add another 1 minute rest. And it's not a long rest. Like it's literally, you could program anywhere from 30 to 90 seconds. I would say the most common I usually do is a minute. It's
Me
just
too.
enough time to get your breathing back down, heart rate just dips down a little bit. Maybe you take a swig of water, especially in the heat, right? That kind of thing, and then you go back into your tempo pace. So yeah, the tempo intervals. Are you a big fan of programming that for your athletes to start out before you really start building up?
Usually what I tell them is see how they feel after if they're the first mile, obviously no, but if they have a 2 mile tempo run and it's their first time, what I will tell people after that first mile, assess if you can keep going at that pace and you really think you can keep going at that pace, then go for it. If you're finding you at the end of that 1 mile, you're like, I can't do another mile of this, stop, take a breather, walk it out, catch your breath, and then go in maybe not as fast, but still faster than your cool down. And that's one of the things that why I talk about tempo pace calculators. But I tell my runners assess how you feel. At the end of each mile, if you have a 2 mile tempo run at that first mile, okay, how do you feel? Can you do this for another mile? Go for it. If you feel you can't, then take that break, recover, and then go on again.
Right. Yeah, and I think it's a huge. I feel like the 2 miler, like you mentioned, is usually doable for most without a
Mhm.
rest. I feel like the three is like the difference maker because,
It is.
anywhere you're looking at, if someone's tempo pace, and we're going to get into paces, but let's just use some examples. If it's anywhere between, let's say, 8 and 10 minutes per mile, that means, you're running essentially between 24 and 30 minutes at this faster pace. So it does become somewhat overwhelming,
Hmm.
not just from a physiologic standpoint, but then also mentally too, right? Where if you just get that, you have that little rest, and the physiologic, you know, benefit, or it's not a huge difference, and I think it allows the body to you know run those miles or that time period with just a little bit of a rest to kind of come down, and to prevent someone from running them too fast and now getting outside of what you had talked about in terms of like RPE of a 7 or an 8, and now this run's starting to turn into like a 9 out of 10 effort, which is
Right.
not what we want for this type of run. So
I'm a
I feel like that 3 mile mark is usually a good time to really start adding in some of those intervals.
Anybody who knows me knows that I'm a huge fan of using strategic walk breaks. And I say, and that's a whole nother topic, but strategic walk breaks, not walk when you get tired for like 5 minutes if you're looking for time. But strategic walk breaks can be a game changer for actually hitting a PR. People don't believe me, but I'm telling you. And if that may be in the tempo run as well.
All right. So, Coach Cat, I understand how to do the tempo run. I understand the sandwich concept. I just learned that Dwayne's a big fan of turkey sandwiches.
Vegetarian.
How how do I? All right. So you got a lot of lettuce. You have a lot of lettuce and pickles in between there, or you got a veggie burger
I
in
do.
between.
Although I've been known to drink pickle juice as my thing, so that's not even
Hey,
that's an
it's
ultra thing,
great
I
in
think.
the hot and humid
Yes.
weather for sure. What? How do I know like how fast I should be running
Okay.
when I go out there for my tempo pace?
Here is where I I I I kind of diverged. Coach Lou is a number person, and I love Lou and I talk all the time. We kind of split on this one a little bit. He is a huge fan of the tempo pace calculator. I like it for experienced runners, and he works with a lot of people who are trying to get to Boston, who are trying to do these really insane like goals in terms of pacing, mostly Boston. You need a tempo pace calculator. You need to put in the tempo pace calculator what your goal time is, and it will spit out what all of your paces should be for easy runs, long runs, tempo pace. That is somewhere where I strongly suggest you utilize that. You know, that's very important for that type of training. A lot of other runners are not, they're doing half marathons or they're not aiming to hit that Boston number. So at that point, the tempo calculator can almost psych you out sometimes because you'll put in your end result of you want to run, and I'm going to give an example, a 4-hour marathon, and your tempo pace may be an 8:30 or an 8:05. Here's the problem: you're putting in, if you have no experience with a marathon, you're putting in what you think or what you're going to do, not what in reality you may be able to do. So it's kind of an ego killer. And I hate to say that, but if you put in a 4-hour marathon, but you've never run a marathon and your halves are, I don't like to give, usually you can double a half and add 30 minutes for a marathon time, rough thing, but 15 to 30 minutes. But if you generally think you know your paces, if you are unrealistic and you're hoping for a 4, it doesn't mean you're not going to be able to run a sub 4. But if you are realistically, or you've run a marathon and you're at a 4:50, a 5-hour, but you put in a 4-hour marathon as your goal, your tempo pace is going to be too fast. And it's numbers. So I always tell people, when you're doing that tempo pace and you're not necessarily trying to hit a specific time goal, but you still want a PR, what I suggest is not initially using the tempo pace calculator, but running on the RPE comfortably hard. If you do put the calculator in, be aware that you're going to have a little bit of a range. And and I learned the hard way, but if your tempo says it should be an 8:30, and you're looking at your watch and your first minute, you're at 8:30 and you're like, oh, this is really easy. You're going to start maybe second guessing yourself. No, stay with that pace. But on the other way, if you're supposed to be at an 8:30 and you're at a 9:30 and you're struggling, if you try to push into that 8:30 range, you're going to be doing a whole different type of workout. So if you're not experienced in terms of knowing your paces inside and out, at this point, I know my paces. I've run enough. I know what my tempo pace should be for a marathon. I know what my tempo pace should be for an ultra. But if you don't have that familiarity, then a tempo pace calculator can be helpful, but only if you look at it honestly, you put in an honest assessment of your abilities, and you really take it with a grain of salt and don't let it psych you out. And you could have one tempo run, it's 90 degrees and humid, you're not going to hit your tempo pace, chances are. If it's a nice, crisp fall day, you may exceed your tempo paces. So you always have to take into account, when you're working specifically with paces, that weather, how you feel, fatigue will all play a role. So a lot of times I like people to run on that RPE comfortably hard, out of breath, but not gasping, and run on feel more so than pace if they're not that familiar. I hope that makes sense.
No, it absolutely does. And I love that you brought up those other variables. And the one that I've talked about, previously with myself learning the hard way, like you mentioned, is
Oh,
I
go
was
ahead.
stuck on that number.
Oh,
And it wasn't because it wasn't my current fitness. And I guess that's what I'll just reiterate your point with goal aspirational marathon time versus what is your actual current fitness, because that's
yes.
the pace you actually want to train at. So ideally, if you have run a 5K, a 10K, a half marathon recently, you're going to utilize that time as your
Right.
current fitness to find out what the calculator pops out for your tempo time, not where your goal marathon time is, because
Yes.
we need to train at our current fitness level. Because if you try for the aspirational goal, then like you said, you're probably not training in the zone that we're
Right.
looking to train in and get all these physiologic benefits of the tempo run. But the kind of learning from past experience for me was
Mhm.
I was stuck. I shared multiple times at a 144 half marathon time, and my tempo pace has been literally 740, 745 for like the last 2 or 3 years. So I've been very comfortable and looking at my watch and making sure that I'm staying at that pace. But what I didn't realize is elevation is going to change and effort
Oh,
level. And I got
yes.
killed on that half-mile incline of Route 10 here
Sorry.
because I would try to still hit it. And I'm like, I'm going to conquer that
Exactly.
hill. I need to hit the 740 pace. But what I didn't realize, like dumb Dwayne back then, didn't realize that, oh, you idiot, like you actually exceeded. And now you actually didn't get the really great benefits of maintaining and holding back and having patience at running faster for a longer period of time and working within that zone because you weren't going on effort. I was just strictly looking at the number on my watch. So I
And
love your point about effort with the weather, the elevation, with the humidity, all those other
I,
variables, even sleep, right?
yeah,
Fuel, hydration, all that stuff is going to play a
I,
role.
I had a tempo pace that I was supposed to be hitting. And while I could hit that, I realized it was moving me into, it wasn't a true tempo run. It was moving me too fast. So I adjusted my mindset, which is always tricky. It's ego. Ego rules us. But I adjusted it to give myself a 15 to 20-second variable on slower. And as long as I was in between a 20 to 30-second variable, it was much more manageable, took the stress out of hitting that target. Sometimes I was able to hit that low end, other times I just couldn't do it. And I was fine with that because I was still running on RP. I was still putting effort in.
Right,
So that's why those pace calculators, unless you are working like with Coach Lou or somebody who really has to hit those paces consistently to qualify for a Boston, I don't put, I don't live and breathe those. That's
right,
just mine. Some people do. But psychologically, people underestimate the mental role. And I'm a strong proponent of this. All of my podcasts have always incorporated the mental aspect of running. I've been very open about I did the podcast on how stressed I used to get about runs. I've done the podcast about mental mind tricks for marathon. So sometimes when we chase that number, it can really not be beneficial for our running, for our purpose of a tempo run, is all
yeah.
I'm saying.
And just so the listeners know, if you do want any of those previous trainings that Kat just mentioned, just click Coach Kat's bio. I'll have the
Mhm.
link with all of our trainings, and you can learn more about those.
Or
But
treadmills.
or treadmills or safety with running, especially
That,
for you female runners.
oh God, yes.
Yes, that was an excellent episode, by the way. Everyone
I,
loved that. Very helpful. But kind of getting back to this tempo point, and I would even honestly push back at you just a little bit because I know Coach Lou, even though like he's a numbers guy, analytics, all that stuff, he will still tell his runners though, like
yes,
here's the number for your tempo run, but don't let it fool you if right it is humid or if terrain. Still go on effort, and so I like to think of the number as a guide, and then like you
yes.
said, know yourself as a runner. Will numbers intimidate you? If so, don't even worry about the number. Go on effort only. But if you're someone like me who's a little bit more type A, maybe I'd like a number around that I should be shooting
I
for,
know.
and then get the number, but then also have a good self assessment and
Yes,
know when the conditions are not best for you to be able to run at that time that your current level of fitness tells you it should be at. And for most of the clients I work with, I explain that to them, on our deep dive calls, and I say, okay, now, hey, we got you pain free, right? We've added in some strides, haven't had a spike in pain at all. here's the next level we're going to go to is this tempo run piece and running a little bit faster. And, I kind of give them a guide of where we're going to shoot for. But then there's always the questions after the run of how
Mhm.
did this feel for you on a scale from 0 to 10? And I'm making sure that their RPE level was, and usually if we're just starting out, I'm going more conservative. So I want to make sure it's at 7, right? And if they're telling me it's an 8, then I'm going to tell them, okay, next week, let's go 10 seconds slower than you actually did this one, right? So there is some trial and error. And, so don't be afraid to kind of play around with that and really do an accurate self assessment that you were at a 7 out of 10. And then always your baseline that you're comparing it to are your easy runs, which should be at a 4 or a 5 level.
Mhm.
And if your easy runs are at a 7 or an 8, then like go back and listen to the easy run episode with Coach Latoya, because you need to learn how to master that first before you
Yes.
even get to the tempo run.
And Lou, and to bring up Lou again, he is a strong proponent of running your runs easy. He
Absolutely.
will, he loves easy run. We all are, but if you listen to his podcast or you listen to his posts on Facebook, he is always saying, run your runs easy. Don't go too fast. You can tell Lou and I talk a lot.
Yeah, easy runs easy, fast runs fast, or hard runs hard. And that's the secret sauce, essentially.
Yes.
And, fast runs fast, meaning when we're doing our tempo runs, like we're running them at that tempo pace and making sure we're in that range. So I think we kind of covered pacing with the tempo run and kind of the calculators, how we can calculate. And it is going to be more beneficial for the experienced runners. Are there any, we kind of got into like some specific types of tempo workouts, but
Right.
are there any types that we didn't cover that you would like to mention?
Not, again, you can do a tempo run based on distance or time, you know, and the tempo workout is again just that faster pace, comfortably hard in between a warm up and a cool down. So the specifics are usually based upon your plan, your fitness, your distance. If you are doing a ultra marathon, your tempo runs are going to be possibly, I also should probably say this, your tempo runs may be slower for, say, a marathon or an ultra marathon if you are holding that pace for longer, but your effort level and your RPE will still be at an 8. So as the distances change, you know, tempo runs for ultras, I'm not going to get into too much of that, but your pace will be slower for a tempo run than it is for a half marathon potentially, but your RPEs will still be the same. So I do like to add that in there. And if you're doing, usually once you go past marathon distance, you start switching over to a time based plan just for practical purposes. But just keep in mind that that is going to be possibly your marathon tempo pace may be slower than your half marathon tempo pace, and that's perfectly fine because you're running on the rate of perceived exertion. The benefits will still be there. You will still get those benefits even if you're running a little slower, as long as your rate of perceived exertion is at that 8 level if you're more experienced.
Right.
So I wanted to add that in there.
Yeah, no, that's great. And, if we could sum this up in kind of talking misconception, I know you said that word earlier, but, what would you say is the big misconception that you would love to change about tempo runs?
That they're complicated, they have to be scientific, that you have to hit a certain pace. Really, those are my three things. A tempo run is just a faster pace. I know there are scientific people out there. Like I said, you want that? Come to me. I'll cover you. I make you even fall asleep, possibly. But, it doesn't have to be a specific pace if you don't want it to be. It can just be a rate of perceived exertion of 8, where you are comfortably hard run, not easy, not sprint. You know, people think it's this big, they overcomplicate it sometimes, and it doesn't have to be complicated. Anyone can do these. Like I said, even if you're training for a 5K, you can do it. The benefit may not be as great. You may not see the biggest benefit from that type of run for a 5K as you will in a half or a full, but you can still get the benefit from it. Don't That's probably the biggest misconception I think people have, is that there's tempo runs are complicated. They don't have to be. You don't have to hit a pace. You really don't have to if you don't want to. If you want to, aim for it. Use a range. Don't use that specific. Use a range so that you give yourself a little leeway. But that's probably the misconceptions.
Yeah, I love it. And guys, now that you really listened to this tempo running training, like, you took the first step. Congratulations. Right now, remember, the next step is growing in your running journey by implementing it. So if you don't know how to implement it and you want the guesswork taken away from you, we gave you a lot of great tips today. But if you weren't exactly following and you want to really learn how to implement and do it in a progressive fashion, and get clarity and focus on exactly what you need to be doing for your training to hit your running goal, then you can learn more about our high touch one-on-one Spark Healthy Runner coaching program, where you can work with Coach Kat or any of the other run coaches on our team that we had talked about today. You can learn more by just going to learn.sparkhealthyrunner.com and schedule a call with me, and we will hop on a call to make sure it's a good fit for really what you're looking for. And yeah, we'll be able to take you to the glory days and really take you to the promised land of giving you that clarity that you need to grow in your own running journey. And don't forget that we talked about our 6 steps to growing as a runner today. There is a full ebook, a lot of training on all of those 6 steps that I mentioned. So you can download that for free by just going to learn.sparkhealthyrunner.com to get that free ebook as well. Coach Kat, as always, it's always fun to chat running with you and learn something from your vast knowledge and experience that you bring to our
Yeah.
Healthy Runner coaching team. So thank you for taking the time out of your very busy day to educate us all about tempo runs.
You're welcome. I love talking. We all know that. Anytime.
Well, yeah, if you love talking, then you're always going to be a guest on our podcast, because,
Yes.
yeah, that's what we do here. And guys, thank you for listening to this. If you're watching the video version on our Spark Healthy Runner YouTube channel, we appreciate if you hit the like button. It will just help YouTube be like, hey, this is helpful content. Maybe more runners should actually learn about a tempo run and how to do it the right way. And if you're listening on the podcast right now, hopefully you are enjoying a run. Probably not doing a tempo run. Maybe you're doing a nice, easy run, but you're thinking about implementing this into your tempo run. But hopefully you are really enjoying your run right now and getting those mental clearing miles in. And if you enjoyed this episode, you will certainly love our episode 159 on how to grow as a runner in those 6 easy steps that I talked about before. So you can cue that up on the podcast, or if you're watching on YouTube, you can just click the video that I have for you here next. And as always, let's maintain a strong mind, a strong body, and let's just keep on running. Until next time.